7,641 islands. I'll say that again, 7,641. And most people only know one thing about the Philippines, that it's got beautiful beaches. Guys, they have absolutely no idea what's actually going on over there. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're cracking open a country that the whole world seriously sleeps on. 10 wonders of the Philippines, natural, historical, the kind that literally knock the air out of your lungs. No glossy travel brochures, no tourist cliches, just the stuff that genuinely blows your mind. We're gonna see an underground river that runs straight through a mountain with bats the size of cats living inside it. Rice terraces that people built 2,000 years ago entirely by hand, no machines, no equipment whatsoever. And one spot where there's a volcano sitting inside a lake, which sits on an island, which sits inside another lake. Yeah, that's not a typo. Stick around and you'll see it for yourself. But first, drop a like if you've never been to the Philippines, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Let's go. Wonder number 1. The Bacuit Archipelago. Karst labyrinths and the cradle of sleeping dragons. Picture this. You're sitting on the narrow wooden deck of a traditional Filipino boat, a bangka. The engine's humming away steadily, and the bamboo outriggers are slicing through the warm, salt-heavy water of the bay. A humid tropical breeze is messing up your hair and leaving a clear taste of the ocean on your lips. Then suddenly the morning fog lifts, just like a theater curtain being pulled back. Right in front of you, massive black rocks rise up out of the emerald depths. They shoot straight up into the sky hundreds of meters high, covered in razor-sharp karst peaks and wrapped in thick crowns of lush green jungle. These landscapes look like James Cameron actually came here to build his sets for Pandora, but then got frustrated when he realized that reality still looked more expensive, more complex, and more breathtaking than any computer graphics ever could. The ocean here has such an intense turquoise color that it genuinely looks like it's being lit up from underneath by powerful floodlights. When the boat slowly drifts into a hidden lagoon surrounded by sheer vertical walls, this absolutely deafening silence takes over, broken only by the calls of exotic birds and the gentle splash of oars. And right at that moment of nature's complete magnificence, you'll definitely spot someone on the bow of the nearby boat desperately juggling a selfie stick, trying to squeeze 250 million years of geological evolution into a 15-second clip for social media. Nature here is so jaw-droppingly perfect that you'd want to toss your smartphone straight into the ocean if it weren't for that nagging human urge to snap just one more photo to make future generations jealous. But let's take a peek behind the curtain of all this visual luxury. What you're looking at isn't just a bunch of pretty rocks. This is actually a massive graveyard of a prehistoric ocean, pushed up to the surface by the planet's incredible forces. Around 250 million years ago, during the Permian period, these black marble and limestone monoliths were a thriving coral reef sitting at the bottom of the ancient Tethys Ocean, far away from where they stand today. The slow but relentless collision of the Eurasian and Philippine tectonic plates literally squeezed these reefs all the way up to the Earth's surface. Then the artists known as time and water got to work. For thousands of years, acidic tropical rains ate away at the soft limestone, carving out incredible karst labyrinths, deep caves, secret lagoons, only reachable by swimming underwater through a narrow crack in the rock, and underground lakes. Geology here basically calls the shots for biology. The stone might look bare, but life is pulsing through every single crack in it. Ancient cycads and endemic orchids somehow cling to vertical walls, surviving purely on morning dew and mist. Deep in dark caves high above the water live swiftlets, small, quick little birds resembling swifts. They navigate in complete darkness using echolocation and build their nests exclusively from their own thick saliva, which hardens when it hits the air. And beneath the water's surface, the Bacuit Archipelago transforms into a cosmic megapolis. Here you can spot green sea turtles, elusive dugongs, and hundreds of species of fish darting through stunning coral gardens. It's like rush hour at a major city intersection. For the Western world, this archipelago remained a blind spot on the map for a long time. But for the local Takwa tribe, these rocks have always been sacred ground. According to their ancient mythology, the tops of karst cliffs are home to powerful nature spirits known as Divata. The Banwa, for instance, believed that these spirits guarded passageways into other worlds, hidden deep beneath the bottomless lagoons. And it was these brave people who spent centuries engaged in a deadly trade right here. Barefoot, with no safety equipment whatsoever, they would scramble up razor-sharp rocks, as jagged as obsidian, to dizzying heights, all to harvest the nests of swiftlets. Even back during the Chinese Song dynasty, around the 10th century, Chinese merchants would sail here on their junks to trade precious bird nests, which were considered an elixir of youth and the key ingredient in a prized delicacy soup, exchanging them for porcelain and silk. When Spanish colonizers arrived here in the 16th century, they were absolutely stunned by the sheer number of bird nests filling the caves and named the main settlement of the region El Nido, which translates from Spanish as nest. However, the true discovery of this wonder for modern tourism happened completely by accident, with a genuine touch of adventure romance. In 1979, a group of French divers and explorers were traveling by small boat through the South China Sea. During the night, a fierce storm caught up with them. The boat's anchor chains snapped, and the vessel began drifting straight toward dark, menacing rocks. In a desperate attempt to survive, the captain steered the boat through a narrow, barely visible gap between the monoliths. When morning came and the storm finally died down, the French crew stepped out on deck and were left completely speechless. They found themselves in a perfectly clear, calm bay, surrounded by towering cliff walls draped in jungle. It felt like discovering the lost world straight out of Conan Doyle. They spent several weeks out there exploring untouched reefs, and before long, word about Palawan's hidden paradise spread like wildfire across the global diving community. Funny enough, it took Europeans nearly drowning to stumble upon something the Tagbanua had known and held sacred for thousands of years. The Bakuit archipelago of El Nido carries one massive risk for any traveler. Once you've been here, you'll permanently wreck your ability to enjoy other high-end resorts. Next time you fly into some flat, manicured island with imported white sand, where the big landscape achievement is a slightly crooked palm tree, you'll be standing at the water's edge feeling this quiet, creeping sadness. You'll realize that human luxury, with all its gold faucets and sun loungers, is just pitiful noise against the backdrop of monumental karst cathedrals carved out by the ocean. El Nido permanently installs a taste for something truly grand in you, and there's simply no curing it. But if these rocks have blown your mind under the open sky, just wait until we head down into the very gut of the earth. Go ahead and leave those sunglasses behind. You won't be needing them. In the next chapter, we're heading to a place that even the most fearless locals were too scared to enter for centuries. We'll be floating along the dark waters of a river that carved its way clean through the heart of a mountain range to find its way out to the sea. Get ready to come face to face with Palawan's underground infinity. Wonder number 2. The Puerto Princesa Subterranean River. The black waters of an underground kingdom. To get here, you'll need to make a short but jaw-dropping boat ride from the small fishing village of Sabang, rounding a headland where wild jungle literally tumbles down into churning surf. Once you step onto a deserted beach lined with ancient trees, you'll feel the whole atmosphere shift around you instantly. You'll be greeted by curious long-tailed macaques who, with the skill of seasoned pickpockets, will be eyeing up your sunglasses. And monitor lizards the size of a decent dog, casually cutting across your path. But all of this is really just the entrance hall to a truly great temple. The trail will lead you out to a lagoon filled with heavy still water the color of thick emerald, and there, at the foot of the sheer cliff face of the St. Paul mountain range, you'll spot it, the gaping black mouth of a cave, breathing out absolute tomb-like cold. The contrast between the scorching 30-degree heat outside and the icy underground air hits you hard enough to send a shiver down your spine. You climb into a small canoe, the boatman pushes off with his paddle, and in a single instant, the blazing tropical light goes dark. You've just crossed an invisible boundary between two worlds. The whole atmosphere is so deeply mystical that you almost catch yourself waiting for the boatman to tear off his t-shirt, transform into Charon in his tattered robes, and demand an ancient coin to ferry you across the river Styx. Though that primal sense of drama gets knocked down a peg or two the moment you glance over at your fellow canoe passengers. Modern-day travelers, all bundled up in bright orange life jackets and ridiculous plastic helmets, frantically trying to cut through centuries of darkness with their smartphone flashlights. It honestly looks like a crew of construction workers accidentally drilled a tunnel straight into the underworld and are now snapping confused photos of Hades' domain. Don't bother trying to see the bottom. The river beneath you is pitch black and drops down to a depth of 8 meters. The Puerto Princesa underground river isn't just some cave sitting at the bottom of things. It's an incredibly complex, living hydrological system stretching over 8 kilometers, cutting straight through the mountain range and emptying directly into the South China Sea. The most jaw-dropping thing about it is that it's actually affected by ocean tides. Twice a day, the sea boldly pushes its way deep into the mountain, mixing its salty waters with the fresh underground springs. The cave literally breathes in sync with the world's ocean. When a flashlight beam cuts through the velvety darkness and catches the cave ceiling, your brain flat out refuses to accept that nature made these shapes on its own. Over millions of years, water loaded with carbon dioxide slowly dissolved the soft limestone, carving out interiors that would be right at home in the halls of dwarves and Tolkien's very own Moria. You float past stalactites that look like giant wax candles melted down by some unknown flame, past enormous stone curtains, folds that remind you of Gothic cathedrals, and all kinds of weird shapes where the human brain, with its tendency toward pareidolia, can easily make out vegetables, animals, or even the faces of saints. The whole thing has a seriously cinematic soundtrack, too. There's this booming echo from water droplets falling, the rhythmic splashing of a paddle, and a constant high-pitched, vibrating squeal. That squeal is coming from millions of bats hanging off the ceiling in these massive, writhing clusters. Right here, in the complete absence of sunlight, a totally unique and self-contained ecosystem has taken shape. The food chain doesn't kick off with photosynthesis. It starts with bat guano dropping down from above, which feeds colonies of blind cave crickets, giant spiders, and freshwater crabs. It's a world of sightless creatures living in permanent darkness, and our presence here is nothing more than a brief intrusion of artificial light into their thousands of years of undisturbed quiet. The sense of scale hits its absolute peak when the boat drifts into what's known as the Italian chamber. It's a cave hall of truly jaw-dropping proportions. The ceiling reaches up to 80 meters high, and it's wide enough for a modern airliner to turn around in with room to spare. The beams from handheld torches just dissolve into the emptiness, never quite reaching the ceiling. You feel like a speck of dust inside the stomach of some stone leviathan. The local Batak and Tagbanwa tribes had known about this black hole in the mountain since time beyond memory, yet not a single one of them would ever cross the invisible threshold of the cave, not for any treasure in the world. In their mythology, Mount St. Paul was considered the home of an evil spirit, whose breath could be felt at the entrance as a cold, tomb-like chill. The sound of thousands of bat wings was interpreted as the whispered voices of underground demons. The river was seen as a cursed path into the land of the dead, with no way back. The first documented attempts by a European to poke his nose into this geological wonder date back to the late 19th century. Back in 1887, a Spanish university professor and administrator made up his mind to explore the mouth of the river. Picture these guys decked out in suffocating tropical gear, armed with nothing but dim kerosene lamps and torches that flickered mercilessly, burning through precious oxygen. They managed to push just a few hundred meters inside. The whole team was worn down by fear of the unknown, the toxic guano fumes, and the constant dread that some prehistoric monster was about to surface from the pitch-black water. The real scientific study of the cave didn't kick off until the late 20th century. The Italian speleological expedition La Venta pulled off a major breakthrough back in 1989. Equipped with powerful flashlights, laser rangefinders, and scuba gear, the Italians slowly mapped out the entire system. It was actually them who discovered the massive hidden halls and upper levels of the cave, where they stumbled upon fossils of sea cows, sirens, that had lived there 20 million years ago, back when these very vaults were still underwater grottos. Even today, far from all the tunnels have been explored. Some siphons demand incredibly complex dives, and who knows what other secrets are still hiding in this labyrinth stretching deep beneath the jungles of Palawan. Taking a trip along the underground river of Puerto Princesa hits your ego pretty hard. When the guide shines a light on a tiny, barely noticeable stalactite and casually mentions that this little chunk of stone, no longer than a finger joint, took 10,000 years of non-stop water drops to form, something in your brain just breaks. You start thinking about how just yesterday morning at the airport you were fuming because your coffee cooled down 5 minutes too fast, or how you were losing your mind over a slow internet connection. Out here, in the very heart of the mountain, time isn't measured in minutes. It's measured in entire ages. This cave will permanently ruin your experience of any man-made attraction. Why bother with haunted houses or amusement parks full of plastic decorations when the planet itself carved the most jaw-dropping cathedral out of solid rock millions of years ago, in complete darkness? And did it all just so some bats could move in? Crawling back out of that cool underground hell, we find ourselves squinting again against the merciless tropical sun. But it's time to keep moving. We're leaving behind the open water and the dark caves of the Palawan to head way up north, to a completely different island. We're going to climb up into the clouds, where the mountain air is crisp and thin. Up there, something incredible is waiting for us. Not something carved out by blind forces of nature, but something built with the rough, calloused hands of people who decided, thousands of years ago, that they could reshape the geography of an entire mountain range using nothing but primitive wooden shovels. Get ready to see a stairway to the sky. Wonder number 3, the Banaue Rice Terraces. An emerald staircase reaching up to the gods. Just getting here is a challenge worthy of Roman legionnaires marching to the edge of the empire. You leave the sticky, suffocating heat of the lowlands behind and start the endless, grinding climb up the winding mountain roads of the Cordilleras. The road twists so aggressively that your inner ear starts begging for mercy. Outside the window, sheer cliffs drift past, wrapped in fog as thick and dense as fresh, warm milk. But when you finally step off that rattling bus at the Banaue viewpoint and a cold, razor-sharp mountain wind hits you square in the face, every bit of exhaustion just evaporates on the spot. What opens up in front of you is something that makes your brain freeze for a moment, desperately trying to process the sheer scale of what it's seeing. You're standing on the edge of a colossal natural amphitheater. The entire mountainside, from the deepest gorge where a river glints like a thin silver thread, all the way up to the peaks disappearing into the clouds, is cut through with thousands of emerald steps. This isn't just a terrace, it's a rhythmic, geometrically flawless pattern that curves and bends, following every contour of the landscape, like giant fingerprints pressed into the earth itself. Depending on the season, the whole thing completely transforms. In spring, they become mirror-like pools reflecting the sky above. In summer, a lush green carpet swaying gently in the breeze. And in autumn, golden cascades of ripened grain. And there you are, standing right at the edge of this massive drop, absolutely blown away by this titanic piece of work. And sure enough, you spot a group of tourists nearby desperately trying to catch a cell signal. That right there is the highest form of modern irony. People traveled 1,000 kilometers to lay eyes on an engineering marvel built by the hands of primitive tribes more than 2,000 years ago. But the only thing on their minds right now is the lack of fast internet, so they can instantly post a story captioned with something about reconnecting with nature. The art of simply looking and taking things in seems to be lost for good. Yet the terraces themselves stand in silent grandeur, looking down on our digital fussing with something like patient tolerance. Calling the Banaue rice terraces just fields is like calling the Great Wall of China just a fence. What you're looking at is the most large-scale agricultural project of the ancient world. If you lined up all the retaining walls of these terraces end to end, they would wrap around half the globe. And all of it was built on near-vertical mountain slopes. The genius of this structure lies not only in its visual beauty, but also in its phenomenal hydroengineering. Tribes that had no written language, no wheel, and no draft animals created an irrigation system that has been running without interruption for more than 2,000 years. They cut an incredibly complex network of aqueducts, bamboo pipes, and earthen channels straight into the rock. Water is collected in the sacred misty forests at the mountain peaks, the Muyongs. The forest is carefully protected since tree roots hold moisture in place and keep landslides from happening. Then the water, carefully measured out, flows down on its own, moving from one level to the next, feeding every single square meter of the rice paddies evenly. It's a closed, perfectly balanced ecosystem. The terrace walls are built from stone and packed clay, rising at angles that seem to dare gravity to do something about it. Keeping this whole system going doesn't require computers or sensors. All it takes is a deeply ingrained, almost genetic understanding of nature. The locals know what water sounds like when it's flowing just the way it should. They can tell whether there's enough minerals in a field just by looking at the color of the dirt, and they've got this uncanny sense for when a slope is about to give way. This isn't conquering nature in the classic Western sense, where you blow up a mountain with dynamite to build a road. This is absolute symbiosis, the art of gentle co-authorship with the landscape. The creators of this wonder are the Ifugao people, fierce warrior headhunters who once struck terror into their neighbors. It's remarkable how a people whose reputation was built on the bloody rituals of taking their enemies' heads were simultaneously a society of genius engineer agronomists. The Ifugao never built stone temples to their gods. These terraces were their temples. Their entire lives, mythology, and social structure were built around the rice-growing cycle. According to Ifugao myths, the art of building terraces and cultivating rice was passed down to them by the god Wigan, who descended from the heavens, and to this day, the agricultural cycle is accompanied by elaborate rituals. Mumbaki, the local shamans, chant ancient incantations and sacrifice pigs and chickens to appease the ancestral spirits, the Anito, before planting and before the harvest. Every single stage requires the approval of the spirits, and not one grain will be dropped into the water without proper respect paid to the invisible world. Interestingly, when Spanish conquistadors began colonizing the Philippines in the 15th century, they had no idea for a long time that this Emerald Empire even existed, and the Ifugao fiercely defended their mountains. Because of how inaccessible the region was, and how warlike the tribe proved to be, the Spanish were never able to fully subdue the Cordillera. The terraces remained hidden in the mists, independent and proud, while the rest of the archipelago was busy putting up Catholic churches. It wasn't until the early 20th century, when the Philippines came under American control, that scholars and anthropologists like Henry Otley Beyer were finally able to properly study and document this wonder of the world. Beyer was so blown away by what he saw that he called the terraces the eighth wonder of the world, a cliché that has stuck to Banaue ever since. He spent years diving deep into the culture of the Ifugao people, trying to wrap his head around how folks armed with nothing but basic wooden shovels and bare hands managed to completely reshape the landscape of an entire mountain range. The answer was rooted in the collective effort of hundreds of generations. Every father handed down his terrace to his son, so the son could reinforce it and push it a little further. Visiting Banaue is basically the perfect cure for any modern human's arrogance. We love to show off our glass and concrete skyscrapers, thrown up with tower cranes and three-dimensional modeling software. But most of those buildings will fall apart and crack up within a measly 100 years. Meanwhile, these clay steps, built by half-naked warriors in loincloths, have been standing for thousands of years, shrugging off earthquakes and typhoons like they're nothing. Once you've stood before this monumental staircase reaching up into the sky, you'll never again find yourself impressed by the neatly trimmed lawns of European parks. Out here, wrapped in the cool Cordillera mists, everything becomes crystal clear. The true greatness of human labor isn't about paving the planet over with asphalt. It's about turning a mountain into a garden without breaking its natural harmony. We leave behind these tough mountain warriors and their emerald staircases. It's time for us to come back down to earth and head toward a region where the ground literally breathes fire and the water hides secrets just as ancient. In the next story, we'll cross the strait and find ourselves in a place where geology apparently decided to play a joke, throwing up hundreds of perfectly shaped, eerily identical hills whose color shifts so sharply it's like someone flipping a switch between seasons. Get ready for a landscape that looks more like a box of truffle chocolates some giant left behind in the middle of the jungle. Wonder number 4. The Chocolate Hills of Bohol. A geological anomaly in a giant's candy box. To really get a feel for this place, forget about air-conditioned cars. You need to rent a beat-up old scooter and ride straight through the heart of Bohol Island. First, the road pulls you into the gloom of the man-made Balar Forest, where mahogany trunks close overhead in a dense Gothic arch, and the temperature drops sharply. The air smells of damp bark and rotting leaves, but the moment you break free from that woodland shade, light crashes down on you with primal fury, and the horizon suddenly starts to ripple. You climb up to the observation deck in the municipality of Carmen, having conquered 214 concrete steps in 30-degree heat, breathing hard and cursing the tropical sun. But when you finally reach the top, it's not exhaustion that takes your breath away. It's the absolute and perfectly rational surrealism of the scene laid out before you. Stretching to the very edge of the earth, as far as your eyes can carry, stands an army of perfectly symmetrical cone-shaped hills. There aren't 10 of them, not 20, but more than 1,260. Some geologists put the count as high as 1,776. They rise above the flat plain anywhere from 30 to 120 meters. The whole landscape looks like a genius but slightly unhinged pastry chef. One Willy Wonka decided to open a branch of his factory in Southeast Asia and left an enormous box of truffles sitting out in the open air. During the dry season, which rolls around at the end of spring, the grass on the slopes burns away and the hills take on the deep, rich color of milk chocolate. The sight is so otherworldly that your brain simply refuses to accept it as something nature actually made. But the greatest irony of this place reveals itself the moment you tear your gaze from the horizon and look at the people sharing the observation deck with you. Dozens of grown, successful adults, dripping with sweat, line up right at the edge of the railing to recreate the exact same optical illusion for their social media feeds. They open their mouths as wide as they can and pretend to bite the top off a hill in the background. That's probably the highest point of human intellectual triumph in the face of unfathomable geological eternity. The urge to pretend you can eat it. Once the initial shock of the visual geometry wears off, a curious mind starts demanding some answers. Who actually built these mounds? Ancient civilizations? Alien architects? Nope, the real creator had way more time and patience than any of those. What you're looking at is a classic yet phenomenally rare example of conical karst terrain. Around 2 million years ago, during the late Pliocene epoch, this entire area sat at the bottom of a warm, shallow ocean. Coral colonies thrived here, shells of mollusks piled up, and skeletons of microorganisms accumulated, gradually building up a thick layer of porous marine limestone. Then, massive tectonic shifts pushed this section of the seafloor up to the surface, exposing it to an entirely new force of nature: tropical rainstorms. Rainwater, as it absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, turns into a weak carbonic acid. Over hundreds of thousands of years, this acidic water slowly, millimeter by millimeter per century, dissolved the limestone beneath it. But why did perfect cones form rather than chaotic jagged rocks, like the ones we talked about back in the first chapter? The secret lies in the unique uniformity of the rock itself and the absence of any large-scale cave networks underneath. Water eroded the stone evenly, carving out a network of streams and rivers that cut deeper and deeper, leaving behind these smooth, symmetrical formations standing between them. The ecosystem of these hills is no less remarkable. The cones themselves are covered exclusively in Imperata cylindrica, a tough and resilient grass that locals call kogun. Its root system is so aggressive and dense that it flat out prevents trees from taking hold. It's this very grass, dying off during droughts, that gives the hills their signature chocolate tone. Down at the base of the hills, though, in the hollows where all the water collects, thick jungle goes absolutely wild. And it's right in those dense thickets that another wonder of Bohol hides: the Philippine tarsier. This tiny primate, no bigger than a fist, has eyes that actually weigh more than its own brain. The tarsier can rotate its head a full 180 degrees and has absolutely phenomenal hearing. These fragile little creatures, looking like they've walked straight off the set of a Yoda movie, are so sensitive to stress that in captivity they can actually end their own lives by slamming their heads against the bars of their cage. Nature here demands absolute respect. Long before Western geologists started collecting soil samples and writing dissertations, the local people of Bohol Island had already come up with their own, far more poetic and dramatic explanations for where the hills came from. The mythology of this region is rich and, in its own way, genuinely charming. The most popular legend tells of two powerful giants who got into a serious territorial dispute. In a fit of rage, they started hurling massive boulders and fistfuls of earth at each other. The battle went on for several days, until both of them were completely exhausted. Realizing how pointless their feud had been, they made peace, embraced, and walked off in some unknown direction, forgetting, however, to clean up the battlefield behind them. Those scattered boulders are what we now call the hills. The second legend is considerably more melancholic. It tells the story of a giant named Aroga, who fell deeply in love with a beautiful but mortal girl named Aloya. When Aloya grew old and passed away, Aroga fell into a profound depression. He sat on the plain and wept day and night. His tears, as they hit the ground, hardened and turned into stone cones, forever preserving the giant's grief in physical form. There's also a third legend, one that's purely peasant in spirit and packed with folk humor. According to it, in ancient times, a gigantic carabao, a water buffalo, showed up on the island and devoured all the crops, leaving the people on the brink of starvation. The clever farmers gathered up all their spoiled, rotten harvest and left it in the creature's path. The carabao greedily gobbled up the offering, after which it suffered a truly catastrophic bout of stomach trouble. The enormous piles of dung left behind by the suffering buffalo dried out in the sun and eventually turned into the hills. The scientific discovery of this phenomenon didn't happen until the early 20th century, when the Philippines came under American administration. The first geological expeditions were completely thrown off by the almost perfect geometric regularity of the hills' shapes. Bold theories even came up, suggesting these were tombs of ancient kings, something along the lines of burial mounds in Japan or pyramids in Mexico. It took decades of research to prove they were purely marine and karst in origin. No bones, no gold was ever found inside, just fossilized corals and mollusk shells, pointing to the fact that these mountains were once the ocean floor. The Chocolate Hills are living proof that nature has its own quirky sense of humor and an unmatched talent for landscape design. Once you visit Bohol, you'll never be able to genuinely marvel at the neat little alpine rockeries in the gardens of European palaces again. The Versailles gardeners with their rulers and pruning shears come across as naive amateurs compared to the raw force that spent millions of years carving thousands of identical, perfectly shaped cones using nothing but water and time. And the most important thing is that standing there, you realize the greatest wonders on this planet aren't created in the rush of deadlines and schedules, but in the slow, endless rhythm of erosion. We leave behind the world of sweet geological illusions because the archipelago doesn't do monotony. If Bohol blows your mind with its calming geometry, our next wonder is pure embodied rage and contradiction. We're heading to the island of Luzon to witness a geological nesting doll, a place where water and fire have twisted together in a deadly dance. Get ready, we're going to a volcano that sits inside a lake, which itself sits inside the massive crater of another volcano. Wonder number 5. Taal Volcano, a deadly geological matryoshka cradled in the arms of a boiling lake. Your introduction to this wonder begins in comfort, which will soon give way to a spine-chilling realization. You arrive in the city of Tagaytay, sitting just 60 kilometers south of the buzzing capital, Manila. There's a wonderful, cool breeze here. The scent of pine hangs in the air, and dozens of elegant cafes and restaurants line the edge of a sheer cliff drop. You order your iced latte, walk up to the panoramic window, and look down. What unfolds before your eyes looks like one of those mind-bending architectural puzzles straight out of Christopher Nolan's Inception, where a dream sits inside another dream and reality keeps breaking down into layers nested within layers. Stretched out in front of you is a vast lake filling an enormous bowl-shaped depression. Right in the middle of that lead-blue expanse of water stands an island covered in dark, ashy slopes. But if you look a little closer, you'll realize that this island is actually a volcano itself, with yet another incredibly toxic emerald green lake sloshing around inside its crater. And up until fairly recently, there was even a tiny rocky little islet poking out of that crater lake. An island inside a lake, sitting on an island, sitting inside a lake, all on the massive island of Luzon. The whole thing is absolutely hypnotic, but the most jaw-dropping irony about this place has nothing to do with the geology. It's the behavior of the people around you. Dozens of tourists are casually sipping sweet cocktails and snapping romantic selfies against this backdrop, completely clueless that they're standing right on the rim of a colossal caldera belonging to an ancient supervolcano. That pretty little island down there isn't just some scenic hill. It's nothing more than a tiny, nasty little pressure valve for a monster that's sleeping beneath several kilometers of water. We humans have this remarkable talent for romanticizing the apocalypse. turning a geological time bomb into a pretty backdrop for our social media feeds. Let's step down from that comfortable viewing platform and look this monster straight in the face. To really wrap your head around the scale of Tal, you need to appreciate that the enormous lake you see first took shape hundreds of thousands of years ago. Back in those distant prehistoric times, a mountain of unimaginable size once dominated this landscape. During a series of catastrophic eruptions, it literally gutted its own insides and collapsed in on itself, carving out a gigantic funnel-shaped caldera roughly 25 kilometers wide. Rain and groundwater gradually filled that void, but the magma chamber underneath never went anywhere. He kept on pushing lava up, building a brand new cone right in the middle of a water basin. This is the second most active volcano in the Philippines, with more than 30 documented eruptions. The moment you set foot on the island of the volcano itself, the air shifts immediately. That heavy tropical humidity blends with a sharp metallic sulfur smell, kind of like the stench of burnt matches. The ground beneath your feet feels unnaturally warm, and from countless fumarole cracks, jets of hot steam hiss out in an unsettling way. The water sitting in the main crater lake has this rich turquoise color, all thanks to dissolved minerals. Its temperature in certain spots hits the boiling point, and the acidity level is so extreme it can literally eat through metal. But the most mind-blowing thing about this hellish place is actually its biology. Because of a series of powerful eruptions in the past, Lake Tal got completely cut off from the ocean. The seawater that was left trapped inside the caldera gradually got diluted over centuries by tropical rains, slowly turning from saltwater into freshwater. The marine creatures that found themselves stuck in this trap had two choices: either die out or kick evolution into the highest gear possible, and they pulled it off. Right here, and absolutely nowhere else on Earth, lives the tuwilis, the only freshwater sardine on the entire planet. But if the tuwilis makes you go, "Aw," then another endemic species will send a chill straight down your spine. Hydrophis semperi, a deadly sea snake that somehow, in the most unimaginable way, adapted to living in fresh, sulfur-saturated water. This volcano isn't just the planet's furnace, it's also a completely wild biological laboratory. The local Tagalog tribe has regarded this place with superstitious dread since ancient times. According to their mythology, a fearsome fire deity lives beneath the ground here, one that demands constant respect. If people broke the laws of nature or angered the gods, the underground ruler would shake the earth and rain down a storm of scorching hot rocks. When Spanish Augustinian monks arrived in these lands back in the late 1500s, they made up their minds to tackle the pagan fears of the locals the old-fashioned way, with a cross and a prayer. Spanish chronicles kept a pretty remarkable story about priests who grabbed a massive wooden cross and marched straight toward the boiling crater during one of the volcano's active periods. They planted that cross right on the very edge of the abyss, genuinely believing that the power of the Catholic faith could somehow plug the throat of this geological leviathan. But the most terrifying and defining moment in Taal's entire history came in 1754. The eruption kicked off in May and kept going at varying levels of intensity for nearly 7 endless months. For the local settlements, it was nothing short of a biblical apocalypse. The sky went so dark that people had to light candles in the middle of the day. The volcano spat out millions of tons of ash, pumice, and boiling mud. The old Spanish towns of Taal, Lipa, and Sala, which had been thriving on the shores of the lake, were either wiped off the map or buried under layers upon layers of gray dust. Residents fled in a total panic, leaving behind their homes and livestock. It was exactly this eruption that permanently sealed off the channel connecting the lake to the ocean, forever changing the water's chemical makeup and the fate of the entire region. Volcanologists have been studying Taal for well over a century now, setting up seismographs and running gas analysis. But the volcano keeps reminding everyone who's actually in charge around here. In early 2020, when people were all caught up in their modern-day concerns, Taal suddenly woke up and hurled a column of ash more than 15 kilometers into the ash didn't just blanket the surrounding provinces, it drifted all the way to the capital, shutting down the international airport and turning the whole landscape into a gray, moon-like wasteland. It was a quick and furious wake-up call. We can throw up as many seismological stations as we want, but controlling the Earth's own breathing is simply beyond us. Visiting Tal changes the way you see things permanently. Standing on the edge of this deadly nesting doll of destruction, you suddenly get a very clear sense of just how pointless human arrogance really is. We buy lakefront property, take out life insurance policies, and map out our schedules 5 years ahead, completely ignoring the fact that we're nothing more than temporary tenants living on an incredibly thin crust of a scorching hot ball. Tal Volcano is honestly the best antidepressant you could ever find for life's petty little problems. When you witness with your own eyes this ancient furnace capable of wiping out several cities within an hour, your worries about dropping stock prices or the wrong shade of wallpaper dissolve into thin air faster than the smell of sulfur on a windy day. We pull away from the scorching breath of the Earth's core, leave the ash and sulfur behind because our journey is taking a sharp turn. From tight, suffocating craters, we're heading straight into absolute blueness. We're leaving solid ground behind to dive into a place where gravity loses its grip and colors become so vivid they actually hurt your eyes. A coral empire lost in the middle of the open ocean is waiting for us, a place you can only reach by boat where the rules weren't written by people, but by sharks. Wonder number 6. Tubataha Reefs. A coral empire sitting right in the middle of a sapphire abyss. Getting to this wonder as a casual tourist is basically impossible. There are no airports, cozy docks, or fancy beachfront bungalows here. To actually get here, you're looking at spending at least 10 hours aboard a safari vessel grinding through thick, oily swells of the Sulu Sea, hundreds of kilometers away from the nearest hint of civilization. You wake up before dawn to the rumble of diesel engines and step out onto the deck. All around you, there's an absolute ringing emptiness of open ocean, its water carrying a deeply unsettling, almost black sapphire hue. But the moment the first rays of sunlight slice through the horizon, the water directly ahead of the bow suddenly explodes into blinding turquoise. You squeeze into a tight, cold neoprene wetsuit, strap a heavy tank of compressed air onto your back, and with a loud splash, fall backwards into the abyss. And in that very same second, the world above the surface simply stops existing. Gravity is cancelled. You're just hanging there in complete weightlessness, like an astronaut who stepped out into open space. Except instead of black vacuum all around you, you're surrounded by such an insane concentration of life that it practically makes your eyes vibrate. And that's exactly when this sharp, prickly irony hits you. The richest and most successful people on the planet shell out thousands of dollars to sleep in cramped little cabins, deal with seasickness, and survive on basic rations, all just to earn the right to go down to a place where their social status, fancy watches, and follower counts mean absolutely nothing. To a 10-foot tiger shark casually cruising past 5 meters away from you, you're just some clumsy, bubble-blowing creature that moves way too slowly to be worth hunting and smells too weird like rubber to take seriously. The ocean wipes out human ego in an instant, and honestly, that's the most beautiful feeling in the world. The reefs of Tubataha aren't just some pretty shallow coral garden. This is the crown of a truly massive geological monument. Millions of years ago, underwater volcanoes were going absolutely wild here, pouring out streams of magma and building enormous mountains rising up from the floor of the Sulu Sea. Over time, the volcanic activity died down. The mountains started slowly sinking back into the dark depths over thousands of years. But coral polyps, those tiny little architects of the ocean, had no intention of disappearing into the darkness. They kept growing upward, constructing their limestone palaces on the remains of a sinking crater, always reaching toward the life-saving sunlight above. What we see today, 2 enormous atolls and 1 coral reef, is nothing more than the shining crowns sitting on top of mountains that are sleeping beneath the water. When you swim up to the edge of the atoll, your heart literally skips a beat. The flat plateau just suddenly drops away into a sheer vertical wall plunging down to depths of over 100 meters. That wall is like a vertical Manhattan built entirely for ocean creatures. It pulses with absolutely wild neon colors. Giant sponges shaped like pitchers, big enough to fit a full-grown adult inside, are tangled all throughout it. Fragile fans of Gorgonian corals catching nutrient-rich currents, and hard corals that look like deer antlers. This isolated ecosystem sits right at the heart of what's known as the Coral Triangle, the global hub of marine biodiversity. Here, you can come across massive schools of barracuda spiraling into a perfect formation, looking like a silver tornado. If you're lucky, a whale shark will silently glide above your head, blocking out the sun, a gentle giant the size of a city bus. But the real aristocrats of these waters are mantas, giant devil rays. They cruise through the water column with the grace of stealth bombers, beating their enormous wings. Down here, under the weight of the water, and to the rhythmic hissing of your own breathing that sounds just like Darth Vader, you realize that we humans are basically aliens on our own planet, and the true rulers of Earth breathe through gills. For the rest of the world, this lost oasis remained unknown for a long time, but the tough sea nomads, the Sama Bajau tribes, had known about it for centuries. The very word Tubataha in their dialect means a long reef that surfaces at low tide. For them, it was no place for recreation, it was harsh hunting grounds. The Bajau had a remarkable physiology. They could hold their breath for incredible stretches of time and dive down to serious depths without any equipment whatsoever, going after rare fish and pearls. They believed that these remote reefs had their own fierce spirits demanding respect. After all, the Sulu Sea is well known for brutal storms capable of smashing a wooden boat to splinters. The modern history of Tubataha began in the late 70s of the 20th century, when the first daring scuba divers and adventure seekers reached it on converted fishing vessels. What they saw blew their minds completely. An untouched paradise where fish showed no fear of humans, simply because they had never seen one before. However, right behind the romantics came the poachers. By the 80s, a deadly threat was hanging over the reefs. Barbaric fishing using cyanide and dynamite. Criminals were blasting fish with explosives, turning thousand-year-old coral palaces into barren rubble of white debris. If it hadn't been for the desperate intervention of a group of Filipino marine biologists and passionate diving enthusiasts, this paradise would have been lost forever. They launched an unprecedented campaign, and in 1988 the government declared the reefs the country's first national marine park. Then in 1993, UNESCO took it under its protection. Today the park is guarded by rangers, genuine heroes of our time. Just picture their lives. A handful of people spend up to 2 months in complete isolation on a tiny sandbar where a wooden station has been built. All around them is nothing but endless ocean, typhoons, and endless patrols of the territory while watching out for illegal fishermen. They are the thin line of defense standing between human greed and the planet's untouched beauty. Tourist access here is only open for 3 months a year, from March through June, when the unpredictable monsoons offer a brief window, allowing boats to safely drop anchor. The reefs of Tubataha hit your perception of ocean recreation like a freight train. Once you get back home, you might think about checking out some overhyped aquarium, or try snorkeling with a mask at some crowded beach packed with hotels, and you'll be utterly disappointed. Even the most expensive resort with its own house reef will feel like a dull, half-dead fish tank in a cheap Chinese restaurant, where a couple of depressed little fish drift sadly among plastic decorations. Once you've witnessed the wild, fierce, vibrating life of an oceanic frontier, you become a prisoner of that blue world forever. Tubataha is proof that the best way to preserve a wonder is to make it as inaccessible as possible for the lazy majority. We leave the ocean giants soaring through their sapphire infinity and head back to solid ground. It's time to shake the salt off our clothes, because up ahead, we've got winds strong enough to knock you clean off your feet, and landscapes that look way more like the backdrop of some English Gothic novel than a tropical archipelago. We're heading to the absolute northernmost edge of the country, where the Pacific Ocean slams straight into the South China Sea, smashing itself into foam against sheer, unforgiving cliffs. Out there, tucked among emerald hills, stand houses whose roofs are thicker than their own. The Batanes Archipelago. Emerald frontiers of storms and stone fortresses. To actually get yourself to this edge of the world, you're going to have to put your life in the hands of a tiny propeller plane that'll toss you around in air pockets like an autumn leaf caught in a hurricane. When the landing gear hits the short runway at Basco Airport with a loud thud, you'll breathe one serious sigh of relief. But the moment those cabin doors swing open, what hits you isn't the sticky tropical heat you got so used to down south. Instead, it's a dense, piercingly fresh, and downright aggressive gust of wind, carrying the smell of crushed grass and the iodine bitterness of open ocean. When you look around, you'll experience one seriously powerful cognitive dissonance. There are no palm trees lazily leaning over white sand, No dreamy blue calm lagoons anywhere in sight. What stretches out before you are endless emerald green hills that drop off in sharp cliffs straight into a churning lead blue abyss. The whole place looks like somebody carved out a chunk of the Scottish Highlands, threw in a bit of Ireland, sprinkled in some of those grim iron islands from Game of Thrones, and just randomly dropped the whole thing into the tropical latitudes of the Pacific Ocean. Waves smash against black basalt cliffs with this primal, raw fury, hurling columns of white foam up to the height of a multi-story building. And right there, on the very edge of that cliff, you'll absolutely stumble across one pretty amusing example of modern tourist absurdity. Female influencers who flew all the way out here chasing beautiful shots are desperately trying to pose in light, flowy dresses. But the merciless wind of batanes turns their romantic outfits into straitjackets within seconds, and their carefully styled hair into nests that would make a paranoid crow feel right at home. They get mad at the elements, completely missing one simple truth. Batanes isn't a backdrop for your photos. It's a place that demands your total, unconditional surrender to the raw, absolute power of nature. The harshness of this archipelago comes down to its unique geographical and geological position. Batanes is the northernmost point of the Philippines, a tiny scattered cluster of islands squeezed right into the Bashi Channel. This is exactly where two colossal bodies of water come crashing into each other in a titanic collision, the bottomless Pacific Ocean and the restless South China Sea. The currents here are so treacherous, tangled, and aggressive that the water often boils with whirlpools even on a perfectly clear day. The islands themselves are volcanic in origin. The main island of Bataan is dominated by the majestic cone of the stratovolcano Iraya, whose summit is almost always buried under a thick, dramatic cap of clouds. It looks like the mountain is smoking one giant cigar. But the main architect of this landscape isn't fire, it's typhoons. The archipelago sits right in the middle of what's known as the Typhoon Alley. Every single year, dozens of the most destructive storms on the planet unleash their full fury against these rocks before moving on toward the shores of Asia. That's exactly why there's almost no tall tropical forest here. The local flora has adapted to constant aerodynamic stress. Plants creep low along the ground, clinging to the sparse volcanic soil for dear life. Local farmers have developed their own system to deal with it. They plant dense living hedgerows of reeds and shrubs that break up the vast green hills into geometric patches. These hedgerows serve as the only protection for their garlic and sweet potato crops against the merciless wind that strips everything living right off the ground. Half-wild cows and goats wander melancholically across the hills, and they seem to have developed a perfect sense of balance, somehow managing to graze on near-vertical slopes while storm winds howl all around them. The people who call this harsh land home, the Yami and the Vatans, are direct descendants of ancient Austronesian seafarers who made their way southward from Taiwan thousands of years ago. And the Vatans are truly the living embodiment of human resilience. They never tried to conquer the elements. Instead, they learned how to become part of them. Just take a look at their traditional clothing, the vakul. It's a heavy, haystack-like hooded cape woven from the tough fibers of the endemic voivoi palm. Itan women wearing it look like mythical creatures straight out of the forest. But this primitive garment does its job perfectly, shielding its wearer from scorching sun and slashing horizontal rain, the kind that would destroy any modern umbrella within seconds. But the most jaw-dropping achievement of the Itans is without a doubt their architecture. Right up until the end of the 16th century, they were living in wooden and bamboo huts that had to be rebuilt from scratch after every serious typhoon. When Spanish missionaries and officials formally incorporated the archipelago into the Spanish Empire back in 1783, they brought along the art of stonemasonry and the use of lime mortar. What followed was a truly unique cultural fusion. The Vatans took Spanish techniques and adapted them to suit their own climate. And that's how the legendary stone houses of Botanos came to be, real fortresses, every single one of them. Their walls are built from heavy boulders and coral blocks, with the masonry sometimes reaching a thickness of 1 meter. The windows are tiny, designed to keep hurricane-force winds out, and they're only placed on the sides of the house that are sheltered from the prevailing monsoons. Topping off this citadel is a massive roof made from kogon grass. This thatched cap can be over 1 meter thick, and it's woven so tightly that not a single drop of water can get through. Building just one of these roofs takes the whole village working together. This tradition of mutual aid goes by the name Payanovin. Inside these bunker-like homes, the Vatans calmly sip their tea and sleep soundly, while outside, the wind tears trees out by the roots and hurls boats against the rocks. By the way, it was precisely because of its strategic location between Taiwan and Luzon that these isolated islands were among the first to take a hit during World War II. Back in December 1941, Japanese imperial forces landed on Batanes to use it as a staging ground. The remains of old bunkers and tunnels still scar the emerald hillsides to this day, serving as a reminder that even at the edge of the world, you can't hide from human madness. Traveling to Batanes is one seriously powerful antidote to the kind of comfort zone softness we've all gotten used to. We're so quick to complain when the air conditioning goes out at our hotel, or when rain ruins our beach day. But standing on the edge of the Marlborough Hills cliffs, with the deafening roar of two oceans crashing into each other, you suddenly realize just how petty your complaints about the weather really are. Batanes teaches you that true peace isn't about finding a place where storms never come. It's about building the walls of your soul just as thick as the stone walls of the Ivatan houses, strong enough to weather any hurricane. And when you get back to civilization, every other resort, with its plastic sun loungers and neat little umbrellas, is going to feel unbearably bland and fake. You'll find yourself missing that fierce, icy wind of freedom hitting you square in the face. We're leaving the rugged north and its untamed winds behind. It's time for a dramatic change of scenery as we head far south to Mindanao, the second largest island in the archipelago. Hidden deep within dense, nearly impenetrable jungle lies a river with no visible source. The water there carries such an unnatural sapphire color that it almost looks like it's glowing from within with some kind of magical light, and fish vanish into its depths as if whisked away by a wave of an invisible wand. We're heading to a place where the line between geology and pure mysticism completely disappears. Wonder number 8. The Enchanted River of Hinatuan. A sapphire abyss nestled in the arms of a mystical forest. To reach this wonder, you'll need to venture deep into the province of Surigao del Sur on the island of Mindanao. The road cuts through dense, suffocating jungle, where the air is so hot and humid that it feels like you could actually drink it in small sips. All around you, there's a deafening chorus of insects, while massive ferns and tangled vines close in overhead, giving you the distinct feeling that you're slowly sinking into some prehistoric green depths. But then, without warning, the jungle pulls back, and what opens up in front of you is a sight that makes you genuinely question your own sobriety. Stretched out before you is a small river, except it has no visible current whatsoever. It looks like a perfectly still, flawlessly circular mirror cut right into the limestone rock. But the truly jaw-dropping part is the color of the water. In the very center, there's an abyss of such deep, internally glowing sapphire blue that it looks like someone poured millions of liters of liquid ultramarine straight into the earth. Closer to the banks, that light gradually shifts into the palest turquoise and what can only be described as liquid crystal. The water here is so impossibly clear that fallen tree trunks resting 40 meters down are visible in perfect detail, as though they're sitting just beneath a thin sheet of glass. You feel like Alice who just tumbled headfirst down the rabbit hole, or like a character from a Hayao Miyazaki film who accidentally stepped through the door into the spirit world. And then comes the moment of pure, uncut farce. Right at noon, a loud bell rings out over the river, and from the speakers booms the solemn anthem of Hinatuan. Park attendants, politely, but absolutely firmly, ask every single tourist to get out of the water. And at that exact moment, rising up from the deep sapphire abyss as if on a conductor's cue, dozens of enormous silvery fish appear. Jacks. They arrange themselves into immaculate schools and begin circling through the water, waiting patiently for the rangers to toss them their feed. The whole thing looks hilariously absurd. People with expensive cameras stand on their tiptoes, holding their breath in anticipation of some ancient magic, while the local fish demonstrate a level of discipline and punctuality that plenty of office workers could honestly learn from. The Enchanted River of Hinatuan is a truly one-of-a-kind geological and hydrological phenomenon. Its length is remarkably short, only around 80 meters from its source to where it flows out into the Pacific Ocean. But the really fascinating part is where all that water actually comes from. The river doesn't run down from any mountains. Instead, it gushes up powerfully from a seemingly bottomless karst sinkhole, a blue hole that plunges deep into the heart of the island. From a scientific standpoint, that sapphire-colored depth is essentially the entrance to a massive system of underwater caves and tunnels. The water in Hinatuan is an incredibly complex mixture. Near the surface, it's fresh water coming in from hidden underground rivers that wind their way through thick layers of limestone, which works like a perfect natural filter, purifying the water to absolute clarity. Down below, though, salt water creeps into the cave from the ocean through an intricate network of underwater siphons. The difference in density between the fresh and salt water gives rise to a phenomenon known as a halo. It's precisely this mixing, combined with the depth of the sinkhole and the exceptional purity of the water, that produces that breathtaking optical effect, where sunlight refracts and scatters every spectrum except a piercing, vivid blue. When it comes to the biology of the place, scientists are still scratching their heads. In the deepest part of the blue hole, there's almost no small fish or algae to speak of. The water down there is simply too clean and too poor in organic matter. And yet, massive jacks, fish that typically live out in the open ocean, regularly make their way here through the underground tunnels. They use this cave as a reliable and safe refuge. When you look into the water, it honestly looks like the fish are floating in midair above an abyss. The boundary between the water and the atmosphere is so barely visible, it's almost unreal. For the local Manobo tribes, the Hinatuan River has always been a sacred and deeply forbidden place. According to their traditional stories, the river has no earthly origin whatsoever. They believe that long, long ago, two beautiful fairies, known as Encanto, were soaring above the jungle. One of them let a drop of sapphire fall into the water, and the other dropped a piece of jade, and that's what gave the river its mystical, otherworldly color. The Manoba people believed that the fish swimming in the river were actually enchanted guardians of the underworld, and catching them would bring a terrible curse down upon your entire bloodline. Even today, local folks whisper among themselves that at night, once the tourists have packed up and left, glowing creatures appear along the riverbanks and take a dip in those sapphire waters. That's exactly why swimming in the river after sunset is strictly off-limits. The scientific exploration of this underwater universe only kicked off relatively recently, back in 1999, when a professional Filipino diver named Alex Santos made the very first attempt to explore the depths of the sinkhole. But the real hero of Hinatuan's research story turned out to be the remarkable doctor and cave diver Alfonso Amoros. In 2010, Dr. Amoros launched a full-scale expedition to map out the underwater labyrinths hiding beneath the surface. He plunged into the icy darkness of the cave, squeezing through narrow passages where a single clumsy kick of a fin could stir up a cloud of silt and wipe out all visibility in an instant. At a depth of 30 meters, he stumbled upon a massive hidden chamber, which they ended up calling the Mayor's Chamber. His research revealed that the cave drops to a depth of over 80 meters and continues into a complex network of horizontal tunnels stretching all the way toward the ocean. Sadly, this breathtaking underwater world comes with deadly risks. In 2014, Dr. Amoros tragically lost his life during another challenging dive in a different cave system, leaving the map of Hinatuan forever unfinished. The secrets of the Sapphire Abyss are still out there, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them. Hinatuan is the kind of place that will absolutely ruin every other river on this planet for you. When you get back home, you might decide to take a casual stroll along the banks of some local river. And what are you going to see? Murky, brownish water the color of half-finished cocoa, with sad old plastic bottles and last year's algae drifting around aimlessly. You'll think back to the sapphire depths of that enchanted river, where the water was cleaner than the air in your own bedroom, and you'll let out one long, heavy. Hinatuan makes it crystal clear that nature is fully capable of crafting a pool so luxurious and pristine that every designer project in every five-star hotel on the planet would pale in comparison. But this pool is well guarded by ancient geology and, quite possibly, a couple of irritated spirits who really don't appreciate having their peace disturbed. We're leaving behind the cool mystique of Mindanao's underground springs. Our journey is calling for altitude and fire once again. From the hidden depths of the forest, We're heading to the island of Luzon to come face to face with perfection itself. The next chapter brings us something truly extraordinary, whose geometry is so flawless it almost looks man-made. We're making our way toward a volcano whose perfect symmetry has been inspiring poets and terrifying entire provinces for centuries. Wonder number 9, Mayon Volcano. The perfect cone of death and breathtaking beauty. You'll catch a glimpse of it right from the airplane window as you fly into Legazpi City, or from the middle deck of a ferry crossing Albay Gulf. Against a backdrop of soft, fluffy tropical clouds and endless green coconut groves, a silhouette suddenly appears with such immaculate geometric form that your mind simply refuses to accept it as real. This is Mayon Volcano. It looks like something a diligent student drew with a ruler during a drafting class, or like a polished digital render for some sci-fi film set on distant planets. Regular mountains are messy things, carved up by ravines, landslides, and lopsided peaks. Mayon, on the other hand, is an absolute textbook pyramid, whose flawless cone shoots skyward to a height of more than 2,460 meters. Above its sharp summit, there's almost always a thin, semi-transparent wisp of white smoke drifting lazily, melting into a gentle reminder that this picture-perfect beauty is actually the most active and deadliest volcano in the entire Philippine archipelago. And right there, at the foot of this impeccable geometry, the age-old drama of human recklessness plays out in full swing. Dozens of tourists rent noisy ATVs and go tearing across the black, hardened lava flows from past eruptions with triumphant shouts. They pose in bright helmets, throwing around silly gestures and laughing their heads off as they scramble up basalt boulders, completely oblivious to the fact that they're standing on the scorched blood of the earth. They're having a blast on the ruins of past disasters, riding around on machines that sound like lawnmowers, right in the crosshairs of a massive natural cannon, ready to fire off a searing pyroclastic flow at any given moment. Human courage pretty often crosses the line into flat-out stupidity, but Mayon just watches all this fuss with a regal and deeply unsettling calm. The secret behind Mayon's incredible symmetry lies in its geological nature. It's a classic stratovolcano, or layered volcano. It's been building itself up over hundreds of thousands of years in a subduction zone, where the Philippine oceanic plate slowly creeps underneath the Eurasian one. Its cone is made up of alternating layers of hardened, viscous lava, ash, and rocky debris. The lava there is andesitic. It has really high viscosity, which means it doesn't spread out very far but instead solidifies quickly right on the slopes, gradually building up height and maintaining those flawless proportions. Since pretty much every single eruption happened through one central crater, new layers got distributed remarkably evenly across all 360 degrees of its circumference, but this aesthetics comes with a deadly price. Mayon has erupted more than 50 times over the last 400 years. The biggest danger of the volcano isn't the lava flows you can actually run away from, but the pyroclastic density currents. These are basically hurricanes made of superheated gas, ash, and chunks of rock, heated up to temperatures exceeding 500 degrees. They tear down from the summit and race down the slopes at speeds of over 100 kilometers per hour, instantly burning and wiping out absolutely everything in their path. And yet the surrounding area around the volcano is one of the most densely populated and fertile regions on Luzon. Volcanic ash is packed with minerals, which makes the soil of Albay province incredibly rich and productive. The harvests of coconuts, rice, and Abaca Manila hemp here are nothing short of record-breaking. Even though every few years farmers have to abandon their homes and run for their lives from lahars, those devastating mud flows that happen when tropical rainstorms wash tons of fresh volcanic ash straight off the slopes and down into the valleys below. Living at the foot of Mayon is basically one endless game of Russian roulette with some geological deity. For the indigenous Bicolano people, Mayon has always been something alive, something with a soul. The very name of the volcano actually comes from the word Magayon, which in their language means beautiful. And tied to the origin of this mountain is one of the most heartbreaking and breathtaking legends the Philippines has ever produced. The legend tells of a gorgeous young woman named Daragang Magayon, the daughter of a local chieftain. Plenty of noble warriors came after her hand, but her heart belonged entirely to a brave young man named Panganoron, which translates to cloud. However, A bitter and rejected suitor named Pagtuga kidnapped Magayan's father, threatening to kill him unless the girl agreed to become his wife. When Panginoron got word of this, he gathered his warriors and charged straight into battle against Pagtuga's forces. Right in the heat of the fighting, the two lovers ran toward each other, but a stray arrow pierced Magayan's chest, and Panginoron was struck down by a spear right there over her body. The grief of everyone who loved them was absolutely boundless. The lovers were buried together on the very spot where they fell. As time passed, the earth above their grave began to rise, climbing higher and higher until it became the magnificent volcano we know today. The Bicolano people believe that whenever the peak of Mayon disappears behind the clouds, it's Panginoron gently wrapping his arms around his beloved. And when the volcano furiously hurls lava and ash, it's either Pagtuga's rage shaking the earth out of jealousy, or Panginoron's grief breaking through the centuries. The very first written record of Mayon's eruption was left behind by Spanish Franciscan monks back in 1616. But the darkest day in the entire history of the region came on the 1st of February, 1814. That morning, the volcano began erupting with a force that had never been witnessed before. The sky turned dark in an instant, flipping day into night, while a shower of massive scorching rocks and suffocating ash came crashing down on the earth. The residents of the nearby thriving city of Cachcava frantically ran toward their main stone sanctuary, a Franciscan church, convinced that the thick walls of the temple and divine protection would shield them from the mountain's fury. But nature plays by its own rules. An enormous lahar, a raging torrent of boiling mud and ash, came tearing down the slopes and completely swallowed the city along with the church. More than 100 people ended up buried alive beneath that gray mass. Today, all that remains of what was once a magnificent temple is the upper section of a stone bell tower sticking up lonely in the middle of green fields, a silent and haunting reminder of that terrible day. Volcano Mayon will permanently reshape your standards of beauty. Once you've visited the province of Albay and laid eyes on that perfect cone, you simply won't be able to genuinely admire other mountains the same way again. The famous Japanese Fuji will start to feel too cold, too dull, and way too overhyped. And your average mountain ranges in other countries will just look like messy, chaotic piles of dirt and rubble that nature threw together without any plan or taste whatsoever. Mayon proves the point. True aesthetics demand drama, and the most perfect geometry on our planet isn't created by the quiet stillness of museums, but by the colossal destructive violence of the Earth's core. We're now leaving the fiery frontiers of Luzon. Our journey is coming to a close, and for our final 10th chapter, we need to head to a place where time has decided to stop completely. We'll leave the terrifying forces of nature behind and dive deep into history. There's a city waiting for us, where the clatter of hooves on cobblestones echoes between Spanish mansions, where tobacco still hangs drying on old wooden balconies, and where the air is thick with nostalgia for the era of great galleons. We're heading to Vigan, a ghost city of Spanish colonization that has somehow held on to its soul right through the turbulent Asian 20th century. Wonder number 10. The historic city of Vigan, a stone ghost of the colonial era. To truly come face to face with this wonder, you've got to wait for twilight. When the equatorial sun finally drops below the horizon of the South China Sea and the sticky, suffocating heat gives way to a gentle evening breeze, make your way down Calle Crisologo. At that hour, dim, warm yellow cast iron lanterns flicker to life, throwing long, eerie shadows across the uneven cobblestone streets. And then, out of that half-darkness, comes a sound that completely pulls you into another dimension altogether. The rhythmic clop of hooves and the dull rumble of wooden wheels from a traditional two-wheeled carriage. You stop dead in your tracks, breathing in the rich, layered air of this place. It carries the intertwined scents of old tarred Spanish cedar, damp brick, the wax used to polish century-old floors in the grand mansions, and the mouth-watering, garlicky smell of longanisa sausage sizzling over charcoal. You feel like you've stepped straight into a Gabriel Garcia Marquez novel, something like 100 Years of Solitude, where time loops back on itself and the ghosts of the past sit at the dinner table right alongside the living as fully accepted members of the family. And right in the middle of that timeless moment, you'll inevitably catch a glimpse of the classic modern tourist spectacle. Some traveler in bright neon shorts and rubber flip-flops, frantically waving their arms around, desperately trying to nail the perfect selfie angle in front of a massive wooden gate from the 15th century, with absolutely no thought given to the fact that those very gates once led into the home of the wealthiest Chinese-Spanish merchant of his day, a man who would have had someone like that flogged right there in the street simply for showing up in such an outrageously inappropriate getup. That's the remarkable thing about vegan. It has a way of making everything modern look cheap, tacky, and laughably out of place against its monumental, stone-cold silence. Vigan is the only major colonial city in Asia that has made it to the present day with its original architectural integrity essentially intact. But what makes Vigan truly one of a kind is the fact that it isn't simply a Spanish city that got somehow transplanted into the tropics. This is an incredibly complex architectural and cultural hybrid that has absolutely no equal anywhere else in the world. The main symbol of the city is the famous Bahay Nabato mansions, the so-called stone houses. Their construction is a genuine masterpiece of medieval engineering thought, carefully adapted to the harsh realities of the archipelago, with its earthquakes and typhoons. The ground floor of each mansion was built from thick, massive bricks held together by mortar made from lime, sand, and, as local urban legend has it, egg whites. This stone citadel basically served as a warehouse for goods and a stable for horses, taking the full brunt of natural disasters. The second floor, though, where all the living quarters were located, was constructed from lightweight yet incredibly strong tropical hardwoods, Nara and Ipil. The wooden frame was flexible by design. During earthquakes, the house would creak and sway, but it never collapsed. It simply absorbed and dampened the ground tremors. Instead of fragile glass, the wide sliding windows used thousands of flat, semi-transparent shells of the Capiz mollusk. These pearlescent panels filtered out the relentless tropical ultraviolet rays, filling the rooms with a soft, pearly, matte light that created an atmosphere of calm and coolness inside the mansions. The layout of Vigan strictly followed the Spanish laws of the Indies, a rectangular grid of streets at the center of which sits Plaza Salcedo, with its grand St. Paul Cathedral and the Archbishop's residence. But behind these Spanish facades lay Chinese practicality. The mansions belonged to wealthy merchants known as insulares, mestizos of Chinese origin. They completely reworked the interior spaces to suit their own needs. Narrow, elongated plots of land were used for storing goods brought in on galleons, while the interiors were decorated with delicate Chinese carvings and dark wood furniture brought over from Fujian province. Vigan is a truly unique monument to the globalization of the 15th century, where Spanish administration, Chinese capital, and Filipino labor came together to create an absolutely one-of-a-kind. The city was founded in 1572 by the Spanish conquistador Juan de Salcedo, grandson of the great Miguel López de Legazpi. Salcedo named the settlement Villa Fernandina after the son of King Philip II. The city quickly turned into a key trading hub along the famous Manila Galleon route. Silk, porcelain, tea, and spices were brought here from China, then exchanged for Mexican silver delivered by galleons from Acapulco. But the most remarkable and touching story of Vigan is tied to how it was saved during World War II. In 1945, as American troops were reclaiming the Philippines from the Japanese army, Manila was reduced to rubble, and many historic cities of Luzon were carpet-bombed and burned down by retreating Japanese forces. Vigan was supposed to share that tragic fate. The Japanese garrison under the command of Captain Takashi received orders to burn the city to the ground before pulling out. However, Captain Takashi was married to a local Filipino woman named Adela Talentina and had genuinely grown to love the city, its people, and its architecture. He had no desire to go down in history as the man who destroyed Vigan. On the eve of the retreat, Takashi secretly met with the local parish priest, Father Joseph Kleekamp. The captain promised that his soldiers would leave quietly, without harming any buildings or residents, if the priest would promise to look after his pregnant wife and child, whom he could not bring along on the dangerous withdrawal. The priest gave his word. The Japanese troops left the city without firing a single shot or lighting a single torch, and the very next morning, American bombers were already lining up on their attack run, ready to drop tons of deadly payload on the historic center of Vigan. But Father Kleekamp, together with the nuns, rushed out into Salceda Square, desperately waving white bed sheets. The pilot spotted the signals at the last moment, realized there were no Japanese left in the city, and called off the strike. Vigan survived. 3 centuries of history were saved thanks to the love of a Japanese officer and the courage of a Filipino priest. Vigan will absolutely shatter the way you think about historical landmarks. After experiencing Vigan, any old European city with its polished-up facades, souvenir shops hawking the same Chinese-made magnets, and crowds of tourists following guides waving umbrellas will feel like boring, sterile stage sets straight out of a Disneyland theme park. Here, the plaster peels for real, the wooden beams groan under the weight of centuries, and the cobblestone streets make you watch your step with genuine respect for ages long gone. This city will permanently ruin your appetite for modern architecture. Once you head back to your glass, concrete, and plastic metropolises, you'll feel like a resident of some soulless human incubator, aching for the pearly glow of Capiz shell windows and the scent of aged wood. And that's it, my dear fellow traveler. Our long, thrilling, and slightly tongue-in-cheek journey through 10 wonders of the Philippine archipelago has come to a close. We've covered an incredible distance together. The Philippines isn't just a dot on the map or some run-of-the-mill tropical beach with a sun lounger. It's an entire universe tucked away between the oceans, where nature and history have pulled off their boldest, most breathtaking, and sometimes downright terrifying masterpieces. Now that you're about to shut this guidebook, the ordinary world will never quite look the same again. But keep this in mind, the most thrilling discoveries always wait for those who are willing to step off the well-worn tourist trail and walk straight into the unknown. Until we meet again, somewhere on the roads of this remarkable planet.